Chapter 278. Kunzu is dead? The few patriarchs from Wanjian school were dumbfounded. Their minds went blank. Kunzu was a peerless powerhouse who had transformed into a primordial spirit. Even if they were on the same level, it would be easy to defeat them but extremely difficult to kill them. However, Kunzu, who was considered invincible in their eyes, had been killed by Su Qin with just one punch? The rest of the Wanjian school's disciples looked ashen as they trembled. To them, Kunzu was like a god who had protected Wanjian school for more than 1,000 years. It could be said that if Kunzu had not appeared out of nowhere 1,900 years ago, Wanjian school would definitely not be in such a situation right now. Even among the high sects, there were open and covert fights. If there were no patriarchs who were powerful enough to hold the fort, why would the other high sects be willing to share their overseas martial Dao resources with you? Right at that moment, one of the patriarchs from Wanjian school suddenly came to his senses and shouted, "No, Kunzu's life fire hasn't been extinguished." It turned out that when the patriarch saw Kunzu being killed, he used his divine telekinesis to scan the place where the life fire was placed in Wanjian school. He was surprised to find that Kunzu's life fire was still burning slowly. If the life fire was extinguished, it meant that the owner of the life fire had completely died. However, if the life fire continued to burn, it meant that the owner of the life fire was still alive. As expected, not long after he said that, the primordial spirit power that was floating in every corner of Wanjian school suddenly began to gather. Eventually, it formed Kunzu's appearance again. His facial features, figure, and aura were the same as when he first appeared. It was as if Su Qin's destructive punch had not hit him at all. Kunzu! Kunzu is not dead. Many of the Wanjian school's disciples smiled again and became even more fanatical. Kunzu's revival did not dampen the confidence of the Wanjian school's disciples. Instead, it made them even more motivated. In the eyes of all the disciples, not only was Kunzu strong, he even possessed an undying body. How could he possibly lose to Su Qin? I have indeed underestimated you. Kunzu's white sleeves still fluttered in the wind, making him look like an immortal. I didn't expect that not only do you have a terrifying physical body, but your divine skills and killing moves are also at the peak of Myth Realm. As Kunzu spoke, he stared at Su Qin. From his point of view, Su Qin had fused at least 5 different killer moves into one. Every move he made was enough to destroy everything. However, it's a pity. No matter how strong you are, what can you do? In the end, he hasn't transformed into a primordial spirit, so he doesn't know the true terror of a primordial spirit. A smile appeared on Kunzu's face. Although he had been punched by Su Qin just now, Kunzu had also gained something at the same time. He had confirmed that Su Qin had indeed not transformed into a primordial spirit. The reason why he could unleash such a terrifying power was that the strength of his physical body and the level of his divine skills and killing moves were high enough. But this point, in the eyes of the Sword Ancestor, was nothing at all. Kunzu, who had transformed into a primordial spirit, was already in an invincible position in front of Su Qin because Su Qin could not kill him at all. I see. Is this the primordial spirit? Su Qin's eyes were still calm. He looked at Kunzu, who was not far away, with a thoughtful look on his face. Just now, he had gathered the 5 Thunder God Fist, Summon the Rain, and 9 Yang Divine Art. Even the demonic dragon of the War God Temple, who was proud of his physical body, could not withstand the punch, let alone other myths. Even if there were 10 pinnacle myths, if they dared to face Su Qin's punch head-on, their physical body would collapse. However, Kunzu was different. He had long lost his physical body and was completely a primordial spirit. As long as there was enough power of the primordial spirit, even if it was destroyed many times, it could be restored to its original state. This was also the reason why pinnacle myths who had transformed into a primordial spirit were said to be free of the shackles of the physical body. As long as the primordial spirit was not destroyed, they would not die. I admire your strength, fellow Daoist, but that punch just now must have consumed a lot of energy, right? However, I have a primordial spirit body and can recover infinitely. You can't kill me at all. Although Kunzu's tone was light, it was full of strong confidence. In this regard, Su Qin just snorted coldly and did not care at all. Even a real Earth Immortal will die, not to mention you haven't even touched the door of the Earth Immortal realm. How dare you claim to be immortal? Su Qin sneered. The reason why you can recover is that you have enough power of the primordial spirit to make up for the consumption. I'd like to see how many times the power of your primordial spirit can help you recover. After Su Qin finished speaking, he stretched out his right hand again and clenched his palm into a fist. In an instant, the sound of thunder resounded in the world again. A bright thunderbolt seemed to have penetrated space and appeared in front of Kenzu. This time, Kenzu was prepared. He retreated quickly, wanting to split Su Qin's attack. Unfortunately, Kenzu was too slow. Su Qin had obtained the 5 Thunder God Fist from signing in at the palace. It could bathe Su Qin in thunder and transform into thunder. At this moment, although Su Qin, who was using the 5 Thunder God Fist, was still not comparable to the speed of real thunder, it was not something Kenzu could catch. Crack! Su Qin's fist imprinted on Kenzu's body again. As if the scene just now was repeating itself, every part of Kenzu's body began to collapse and turn into dust. The second punch. Su Qin retracted his right fist and looked not far away. Once again, a large amount of primordial spirit power gathered and quickly formed Kenzu's figure. Kenzu's expression was ugly and he was about to speak. However, the next moment, before Kenzu finished speaking, he felt a pain in his chest. Su Qin had already arrived in front of him and a faint voice sounded in his ear. The third punch. Crack. Kenzu's figure collapsed quickly. Rumble. The entire myriad sword island was filled with the sound of thunder, as if it had turned into a sea of thunder. The fourth punch. The fifth punch. The sixth punch. The seventh punch. Kenzu's figure was constantly changing back and forth between recovery and collapse. There were even a few times when Kenzu's figure had only recovered to half of its original state before Su Qin threw a punch and it collapsed again. Many disciples of Wanjian school were dumbfounded when they saw this scene. Several ancestral patriarchs even trembled all over as they looked at Kenzu, who was constantly being destroyed by Su Qin, as if they had seen a ghost. They never thought that Kenzu wouldn't even have a chance to fight back in front of Su Qin. It was simply appalling. Sure enough, there's not much primordial spirit power left. After throwing the 9th punch, Su Qin looked at Kenzu's figure, which had obviously become illusory, and said faintly. At this moment, Kenzu had long lost his fairy-like appearance with his white sleeves fluttering in the wind. His aura had withered a lot and his body, which was originally illusory, had begun to become transparent and illusory. Damn it, how can this person be so strong? Kenzu barely managed to maintain his figure, but there were huge waves in his heart. Su Qin's punch, which could disperse his primordial spirit, was already terrifying enough. Not many below the Earth Immortal realm could withstand that punch. Kenzu originally thought that Su Qin had already used all his strength, but he didn't expect that the other party would throw 9 punches in a row. In the blink of an eye, Kenzu's primordial spirit had collapsed 9 times and was on the verge of collapse. Moreover, Kenzu could sense that even after throwing 9 punches, Su Qin's qi and blood had only declined a little, and he had recovered during the conversation. It's still the primordial spirit after all, Su Qin sighed softly and said with some pity. The primordial spirit power was the ultimate transformation of the spiritual force. It gathered and dispersed infinitely and was unpredictable. Ordinary methods almost had no effect on the primordial spirit. If Su Qin also transformed his primordial spirit, he could completely trap Kenzu with the primordial spirit power and then use his own primordial spirit power to continuously melt Kenzu's primordial spirit power. Su Qin had a physical body and could continuously nurture the primordial spirit power, but Kenzu had lost his physical body and the primordial spirit power was like a rootless duckweed. Sooner or later, it would be worn down by Su Qin. Unfortunately, Su Qin didn't transform his primordial spirit, so he could only use this stupid method. He used his physical strength and spiritual force to activate the 5 Thunder God Fist to disperse Kenzu's primordial spirit time and time again, forcing Kenzu to take the initiative to consume the primordial spirit power. Now, do you still dare to say that you can't kill me? Su Qin slowly calmed down the almost boiling qi and blood power. After throwing 9 punches in a row, even though Su Qin's physical body had entered the half-step Dharma body level, it was still somewhat draining. This was also the reason why he stopped. Not only did Kenzu need to recover, but Su Qin also needed to recover. However, the recovery of the physical body was far easier than the recovery of the primordial spirit. In addition, Su Qin had the flesh rebirth ability, so he instantly recovered to his peak. When Kenzu saw this scene, his expression was extremely solemn. In fact, although he still had some primordial spirit power left, he couldn't withstand Su Qin's continuous attacks. When he thought of this, Kenzu immediately had the intention to retreat. I'll fight you again when I possess a physical body and recover to my peak. Kenzu's body abruptly exploded, turning into a streak of light that darted in the direction of the 9,000 feet sword peaks. The 9,000 feet sword peaks were left behind by the 10,000 swords Daoist over 4,000 years ago, and contain the 10,000 swords Daoist backup plan. Even the shaman king of witchcraft 3,000 years ago could not break through the 9 sword peaks. While Su Qin's ability was frightening, Kenzu believed that he would be safe as long as he escaped into the 9,000 feet sword peaks. I might not have been able to stop you if you had run the moment we met. Su Qin shook his head slightly, a hint of mockery appearing on his face. But now that you've used up most of your primordial spirit power, can you escape? Even as Su Qin spoke, he abruptly charged the boundless qi and blood in his body. The frightening qi and blood was like a sun that illuminated every direction. Just as Kenzu's primordial spirit power touched the qi and blood, there was a ripping sound and a miserable cry. Moments before, the streak of light that had been the size of a human began to melt, shrinking to the size of a palm in the blink of an eye. Once again, the palm-sized streak of light reverted to Kenzu's appearance. However, Kenzu's body did not revert to the size of a normal person due to the massive consumption of his primordial spirit power. Instead, he remained the size of a palm as he stared fearfully at the qi and blood energy around him that resembled an ocean. Meanwhile, Su Qin appeared soundlessly behind Kenzu, raising his right hand to grab the palm-sized Kenzu. Chapter 279. When Su Qin fully charged his qi and blood, it was as if another sun had risen over the 10,000 Swords Island. Horrific qi and blood energy filled every inch of space, and even the several patriarchs who had already retreated miles away could feel their true yuan and divine will freezing and slowing down. However, in the very next instant, as everyone looked on in shock, Su Qin slowly stretched out his right hand and opened his 5 fingers, just like the 5-finger mountain of Buddha in the myths and legends. The power of the sword ancestor was constantly evaporating, and now only the palm-sized sword ancestor was left in his hand. In the eyes of the others, Su Qin's right palm was only the size of a square inch, but it was as if it had turned into another world. No matter how much Kenzu struggled, it could not escape the square-inch palm. How is this possible? The Wanjian school sect master's eyes were bulging. As he watched Kenzu struggle in Su Qin's palm, he felt as if his worldview was being completely overturned. This was Kenzu, the most talented individual in Wanjian school after the 10,000 Swords Daoist, a being who had metamorphosed into a Yuan spirit. How awe-inspiring was he when he reigned supreme over the seas over 1,000 years ago. And yet, Kenzu was now like a bird caught in the palm of a man's hand. It was simply appalling. The faces of the several Wanjian school patriarchs were ashen. They never imagined this outcome. Even if Kenzu had lost his physical body, his Yuan spirit form was enough to sweep away all pinnacle legends who had yet to metamorphose into a Yuan spirit. No matter how powerful Su Qin's physical body was, his Yuan spirit form did not have substance and was formless. How could it be trapped in Su Qin's square-inch palm like this? Let's go back. Hurry back to the Sword Peak. The faces of the Wanjian school patriarchs changed, and they promptly gave up on the idea of fighting Su Qin to save Kenzu. Su Qin was simply too frightening. If even Kenzu, who had once reigned supreme over an era, was reduced to an object in his palm. What more them? Besides, even if the patriarchs of Wanjian school wanted to attack Su Qin, it would be useless. At this moment, Su Qin's qi and blood were surging. The area within a radius of a few hundred meters was like an ocean of qi and blood. Even with all their methods, they might not be able to squeeze into this area. Yes. Returning sword edge. The suzerain of Wanjian school and the others suddenly realized what was going on. The 9,000 feet sword peaks deep within the 10,000 swords island had been left behind by the 10,000 swords Daoist 4,000 years ago, and the 10,000 swords Daoist had left a backup plan there. Even the shaman king of witchcraft 3,000 years ago had to stop before the sword peaks. Of course, this was because there was nothing in the sword mountain that could attract Magus kings, but it also meant that there was indeed a great terror in the sword mountain. At the very least, even Magus kings, who were on the earth, couldn't come and go as they pleased. Thinking of this, the suzerain of Wanjian school and the others glanced at Su Qin cautiously and quickly returned to the sword peak. Naturally, the suzerain of Wanjian school's little trick could not escape Su Qin's notice, but Su Qin was too lazy to pay attention to them right now. At the moment, most of Su Qin's energy was focused on Kanzu, who was in his palm. Even if Kanzu's Yuan spirit was almost depleted and was directly suppressed by Su Qin's qi, it would still not be easy for Su Qin to kill Kanzu once and for all. Kanzu was not like the other pinnacle myths whose Yuan spirit was formless, and he could escape if Su Qin was even the slightest bit careless. Even if Kanzu did manage to escape in his current state, he would not be able to hold on for long. Still, how could Su Qin leave such a latent danger alive? Brother, why don't we both take a step back? I'll release your descendant and forget about the matter of him killing one of Wanjian school's pinnacle myths, and you'll let me go? After struggling for a long time, Kanzu realized that he could not escape from Su Qin's palm, so he immediately gave in. In fact, if Kanzu had known that Su Qin had such strength, he would not have dared to fight with Su Qin. However, there was no such thing as pity in this world. Take a step back? Su Qin was not moved at all. He kept urging the surging qi and blood in his body and slowly pressed it into his palm. He shook his head and said, "I still prefer to take what belongs to me." As soon as he finished speaking, terrifying qi and blood surged wildly into his palm, slowly refining every trace of Kanzu's Yuan spirit. In the beginning, Kanzu could still barely resist. After all, he still had some Yuan spirit power left, which was enough to offset the qi and blood invasion. However, as time passed, the Yuan spirit power became less and less, while Su Qin's qi and blood became more and more majestic. Kanzu finally felt fear. "Brother, I know I was wrong." Kanzu's voice became weaker and weaker, and he kept begging for mercy. However, Su Qin had no intention of stopping. Since he had broken into Wanjian school, he had already made a great enemy. Naturally, he had to eliminate the root of the problem. How could Su Qin let Kanzu go? Time passed slowly. Several hours passed in the blink of an eye. In the end, the last trace of Kanzu's Yuan spirit power dissipated in the sound of curses, and the endless qi and blood were burned away. Inside the 9 sword peaks that were 10,000 feet tall, the Wanjian school's sect master and several great ancestors watched Kanzu being forcibly refined with their own eyes, and their expressions were sorrowful. Kanzu had protected Wanjian school for more than 1,000 years, but now they could only watch this happen. One could imagine the sorrow in their hearts. However, no matter how sorrowful they were, no one dared to leave the sword peaks. After Su Qin had completely refined Kanzu, he took a step forward and appeared before the 9 sword peaks. While he had spent most of his energy on Kanzu while he was refining Kanzu, it did not mean that he was completely unaware of the outside world. Su Qin was aware of every move made by the Wanjian school's sect master and the others. Hurry up and activate the great formation on the sword peaks. The Wanjian school's sect master was so scared that his scalp was about to explode, and he quickly joined forces with the other great ancestors to pour their true essence into the sword peaks. Kaboom! The 9 3,000-meter-long sword mountains were finally activated. Streams of sharp sword qi constantly rose up from the mountains. Even the mountains themselves were shaking. From afar, the 9 sword peaks looked as if they had turned into 9 divine swords that pierced through heaven and earth, cutting through everything. The great formation of the 9 swords reincarnation. It was a backup plan that the 10,000 swords Daoist had left on the sword peaks all those years ago. Once the great formation was activated, the 9 sword peaks would be completely revived. Each of the sword peaks contained a streak of the 10,000 swords Daoist sword will, nurtured over thousands of years and gaining sentience. Now that they were revived, it would not be an exaggeration to say that the world was falling apart. Meaningless. Even the great formation of heaven and earth left behind by a pinnacle earth immortal like the true lord of the eastern sea was cut down by my sword. Do you think a dead formation that no one could control could stop me? Su Qin's gaze was dark and profound. The 9 swords reincarnation formation was certainly powerful. It contained 9 streaks of the 10,000 swords Daoist sword will, and could hold off a earth immortal for a short period of time at its peak. That was why the witchcraft's shaman king did not attempt to break through the formation 3,000 years ago. It was not that the shaman king could not do anything against the formation, but that there was no need. So what if he could break the 9 swords reincarnation formation? The shaman king did not walk the path of the sword, and Wanjian school's countless divine techniques and tomes were useless against him. As for cultivation resources, witchcraft had been passed down since the last tide of vitality, and its foundation far surpassed Wanjian school's. Why would it be interested in Wanjian school's cultivation resources? Moreover, most treasures in the world were useless against earth immortals. It was a pity. If it was 3,000 years ago, the 9 swords reincarnation formation was barely maintained at its peak and stopped the shaman king. Now, however, after 3,000 years, the 9 swords reincarnation formation had long since lost its power at its peak. The 9 streaks of sword will in the 1,000 feet sword peaks had been worn down by time, leaving only a sliver. Unlike the true lord of the eastern sea, Wanjian school did not possess a spirit spring that could nurture the formation. Still, no matter how weak it was, the 9 swords reincarnation formation would have no problem stopping a pinnacle myth, and might not even be able to do anything against one who had metamorphosed into a nascent spirit. But in front of Su Qin, who had the eye of truth and could easily see through every detail of the formation, it was full of flaws. The eye of truth could observe all the qi in the world. The heaven and earth formation was entrusted to heaven and earth, so it was naturally within Su Qin's observation range. If the 9 swords reincarnation formation was still at its peak, it would be useless even if Su Qin knew the flaws, because his strength could not even penetrate the flaws. But now, after 3,000 years, the 9 swords reincarnation formation was still weakened to a certain extent, so Su Qin was confident that he could break it. Break! Su Qin took another step forward and clenched his hand into a fist. It was like an ancient giant hammering a drum, fiercely blasting toward the 9,000 feet sword peaks. Boom! A dull sound was heard, and the 9,000 feet sword peaks that were faintly beginning to recover suddenly shook. A terrifying force passed through the 9 swords reincarnation formation and covered the people of Wanjian school. Puff! Several patriarchs of Wanjian school spat out mouthfuls of blood. Their faces were as pale as paper, and they said ferociously, "Block it. We must block it." At this moment, Su Qin, who had thrown out a punch, looked carefully again and threw out another punch. Boom! 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 Su Qin threw out several punches in a row, and each of his punches hit the flaws of the 9 swords reincarnation formation. The terrifying force almost penetrated the 9,000 feet sword peaks. If Su Qin had not deliberately held back for fear of affecting Li Wan, the people of Wanjian school on the sword peaks would have been shaken to death by the terrifying force. But even so, nearly half of the 9 swords reincarnation formation had collapsed. Su Qin could even see through the formation and see the people of Wanjian school on the sword peaks, who were full of horror. Hang in there. The sword peaks were left by Master Kanzu Wan. They will certainly protect our Wanjian school for generations to come. The sect master of Wanjian school was bleeding from his 7 orifices, but he was still encouraging the desperate disciples of Wanjian school. The next moment, Su Qin threw out another punch. The power of this punch was indescribable with words. Su Qin's qi and blood vibrated. Vaguely, a three-legged divine bird as large as the sky condensed behind him. In addition to the majestic power of qi and blood, there were also wisps of scorching flames spreading. Instantly, the Nine Swords Reincarnation formation, which had been tottering in the first place, was completely broken. Countless sword flashes rapidly collapsed, and the elders of Wanjian school who were barely keeping the formation afloat directly suffered a backlash, their physical bodies and divine minds dissipating on the spot. My Wanjian school is destroyed. The Wanjian school sect master could not help taking several steps back and falling to the ground with a thud. His face was ashen as if he had lost his mind. Now that the Nine Swords Reincarnation formation was broken, the Wanjian school sect master simply could not think of any way to stop Su Qin. Unless the 10,000 swords Daoist from 4,000 years ago came back to life, no one would be spared. After breaking the Nine Swords Reincarnation formation, Su Qin pointed out with a finger and broke open the dungeon called the Black Abyss, which was surrounded by the 9,000 feet sword peaks. The Black Abyss dungeon, which was entirely forged from dark nether steel of the North Sea, could not resist Su Qin's finger and shattered completely, revealing Li Wan at the bottom. Third uncle. Li Wan blanked out for a moment, before quickly waving at Su Qin and shouting excitedly. Meanwhile, the white-haired old man who was locked up on the 11th floor of the Black Abyss dungeon took a long look at Su Qin. Could there really be immortals and gods in this world? The old man quickly lowered his head, believing that if there really were immortals and gods, it could only be Su Qin. Chapter 280. When Su Qin stormed into the Myriad Sword Island and yelled, "Kanzu, get out here!" Everyone locked up in the Black Abyss dungeon heard it clearly. However, even though everyone was shocked at that time, they didn't think much of it. They just thought that Su Qin would soon be suppressed by the Wanjian school and might end up being locked up in the Black Abyss dungeon like them. However, what happened next had completely subverted everyone's imagination. Although the battle between Su Qin and Kanzu didn't last long, the power that burst out was enough to shake the entire Myriad Sword Island. Although the Black Abyss dungeon was built underground, how could it not be felt? Especially when Su Qin broke the Nine Swords Reincarnation formation at the end, the 9,000-foot sword peaks roared and the Black Abyss dungeon in the center of the sword peaks looked like the end of the world. Before the people in the dungeon could recover from their shock, they heard the Black Abyss dungeon, which was made of North Sea dark nether iron, suddenly explode and an entrance to the outside world appeared. At the end of the entrance stood a man with calm eyes and a terrifying aura. The next moment, the man with calm eyes and terrifying aura stepped out and entered the Black Abyss dungeon, looking at Li Wan, who was full of excitement. Third uncle. Li Wan blinked her big eyes. She had been in the Black Abyss dungeon for a few days and through talking with other people who were also locked up here, she knew what kind of colossus the Wanjian school was. In front of the Wanjian school, which had a heritage of more than 4,000 years, what was an ordinary peak myth? Unless one transformed his primordial spirit like Kanzu and suppressed the sea with his sword, he couldn't shake any of the major sects at all. Although Li Wan still had a glimmer of hope in her heart, she knew that no matter how strong Su Qin was, how could he defeat the Wanjian school? But now, looking at Su Qin standing in front of her, Li Wan felt as if she was dreaming. Su Qin sized up Li Wan and raised his eyebrows slightly. Before taking action, Su Qin only used his divine sense to confirm Li Wan's safety and did not carefully check Li Wan's physical condition. After taking a closer look, Su Qin immediately found something wrong with Li Wan's body. Before leaving Chang and City, Li Wan was only a level 4 warrior. But now, in just a few months, Li Wan's cultivation had suddenly soared by 1 level. Moreover, Su Qin could see that Li Wan's qi and blood were abundant, and his aura was stable. There were no hidden dangers of forcibly increasing his cultivation. In addition, there was a shocking sword intent in Li Wan's body. That sword intent was vaguely similar to the sword intent contained in the 9,000-foot sword peaks of Wanjian school, and was clearly of the same origin as the 10,000 swords Daoist from over 4,000 years ago. After taking a closer look, Su Qin realized that not only was the sword intent in Li Wan's body free of hidden dangers, it was actually immensely beneficial, helping Li Wan to temper his true yuan and physical body at every moment. Third uncle. Li Wan began to explain everything that had happened after coming to Wanjian school. According to Li Wan, the people of the Myriad Sword sect did not have the slightest intention of making things difficult for her. Not only that, they even gave her all kinds of spiritual fruits and divine pills to consume. In the end, Li Wan was even brought to an altar where a sword will as deep as the abyss was injected into her body. Third uncle, those old men from Wanjian school are really nice to Wan. Li Wan said gingerly. Nice to you? Su Qin thought about it and understood Wanjian school's purpose. Li Wan had the body of the sword heart, which was one of the best bodies for Kanzu's yuan spirit to possess. However, Kanzu's yuan spirit was simply too powerful, and if Li Wan was still a rank 4 martial artist, even his body of the sword heart would not be able to contain the tremendous power of his yuan spirit. That was why Kanzu would definitely need to improve Li Wan's abilities before he could truly possess Li Wan's body, and that improvement must not have any hidden dangers. Otherwise, if Kanzu's hidden dangers were to erupt after his possession, wouldn't Kanzu himself be the one having a headache? That was also why Wanjian school spared no expense and had Li Wan consume various spirit fruits and divine pills. However, perhaps no one from Wanjian school could have imagined that after they had worked so hard to improve Li Wan's cultivation to rank 1 pinnacle, Su Qin would come knocking on their door and forcefully kill Kanzu, even wiping out the colossus that was Wanjian school. On the other hand, Li Wan had profited from his misfortune, enjoying the benefits of Wanjian school without having to pay a price. Still, that sword will in your body. Su Qin narrowed his eyes and carefully observed the faintly discernible sword will in Li Wan's body. Compared to the spirit fruits and divine pills that Li Wan had consumed, that sword will was the most precious. Of course, precious here was only equivalent to Li Wan. Su Qin would not accept that sword will even if it was given to him. Could it have been left behind by the 10,000 Swords Daoist? Su Qin stroked his chin thoughtfully. That sword will must have been the 10,000 Swords Daoist's legacy, which Kanzu had comprehended from the 9,000 feet sword peaks. Kanzu had temporarily planted it into Li Wan's body when he was about to possess Li Wan. With that sword will continuously modifying Li Wan's body, Kanzu's possession would have gone smoothly. Unfortunately for him, Kanzu's move only benefited Li Wan. Otherwise, if Kanzu still had that sword will when he fought Su Qin might not have been able to kill him so easily. After all, that sword will was different from the sword will in the 9,000 feet sword peaks. The sword will in the 9,000 feet sword peaks had been constantly nourishing the 10,000 swords island over thousands of years and had long since been exhausted, which was why Su Qin was able to break it open. That sword will, however, was perfectly preserved. Even if it had lost part of its power over thousands of years, it was still far more powerful than the sword will in the 9,000 feet sword peaks. Study that sword will in your body well. You'll benefit greatly. Su Qin casually reminded Li Wan. Very well. Li Wan quickly nodded as he sensed the benefits of the sword will in his body. Just as Su Qin and Li Wan were about to leave the dungeon after exchanging a few words, the other prisoners in the Black Abyss dungeon mustered their courage and walked up to Su Qin, bowing and greeting him. Greetings, my lord. At this moment, the Black Abyss dungeon had been broken open, and the 9,000 feet sword peaks had lost their suppressive effect. These people naturally regained their strength, but none of them dared to escape from the dungeon at this time. Outside the Black Abyss dungeon, the originally prosperous Wanjian school was now in ruins, and the reason for all of this was Su Qin. It was unbelievable. Third uncle, they are all. Li Wan immediately whispered. Su Qin glanced at them. The strongest among them was an old man with white hair and beard. He was at the 7th heavenly layer mythical realm. Even if he had not condensed a domain, he was still at the peak of the mythical realm. Get up. Su Qin nodded slightly. My lord, you destroyed Wanjian school. You're as powerful as the shaman king from 3,000 years ago. The old man with white hair and beard said respectfully. Shaman king? Su Qin smiled. The Lao Dao cultivator of the Daoist sect had already told him about all the land immortals who had been born in the overseas martial arts world. Among them was the Shaman King. The Shaman King was a land immortal from the witchcraft. His methods were unpredictable. He had traveled to most of the major sects overseas and finally disappeared mysteriously. It was said that he had found the secret of the recovery of the previous vitality tide. But the truth was that no one knew, and even the shaman sect itself was deeply afraid of this and wasn't willing to mention it. "I'm not the Shaman King." Su Qin shook his head. Although he now had the ability to save his life in front of a land immortal, he was not a land immortal after all. Saving his life was just saving his life. As for fighting or even being on par with him, he was still far from it. Even if a peerless divine skill like the Buddha's palm could temporarily make Su Qin perform a move at the level of a land immortal, it was only one move. Of course, if Su Qin had mastered the picture of the great sun and transformed into the most powerful fire-type divine beast, the three-legged golden crow, even if it was only a three-legged golden crow cub, it would be enough to sweep away most of the land immortals. But unfortunately, Su Qin's picture of the great sun was only at the entry level, and there was still some distance between him and lesser mastery, let alone mastering it completely. "Come with me," Su Qin said and slowly walked out of the dungeon. Seeing this, Li Wan immediately followed closely behind Su Qin. The others in the dungeon looked at each other and immediately gritted their teeth and followed. Su Qin and the others left the dungeon and came to the middle of the Sword Peak. This Sword Peak was the main peak of the 9 Sword Peaks. It could be said to be the foundation of the 9 Swords Reincarnation formation. The ancestors of Wanjian School were here to activate the 9 Swords Reincarnation formation. So, they successfully arrived at the top of the Sword Peak. Even though the 9 Swords Reincarnation formation was broken by Su Qin, the place was still filled with an extremely sharp sword qi. Not far away, the bodies of the myriad sword sects disciples were strewn all over the ground. When Su Qin broke the 9 Swords Reincarnation formation, the terrifying power almost passed through the entire mountain. Who knew how many people died under this power? "They're all dead." The white-haired old man who barely managed to keep up saw this scene. While he felt happy, a faint trace of uneasiness emerged in his heart. Wanjian School imprisoned them in the Black Abyss dungeon. These people had long hated it to the core. Now that Wanjian School was destroyed, how could they not be happy? However, the white-haired old man was happy. He felt more and more that Su Qin's means were ruthless and decisive. Wanjian School was an upper sect with at least tens of thousands of disciples. So many people died in front of him, but Su Qin didn't even blink. If it weren't for Su Qin's vast and magnificent aura, the white-haired old man would have suspected that Su Qin came from the Kuragenkyo, a land of wanton killing. Su Qin walked all the way and came to the front of a great hall. This great hall was like an inverted divine sword, standing in front of him, exuding an aura that made people's hearts palpitate. This should be the oldest place of Wanjian School. Su Qin stopped, glanced around, and thought silently in his heart. Whether it was Li Wan or the white-haired old man, they were all standing respectfully behind him, waiting quietly. Su Qin pondered for a while, then said in his heart, "System, sign in." Congratulations to the host for signing in successfully. You have received the Essence Soul Secret Technique, Heart Sword Technique. Chapter 281. Congratulations to the host for signing in successfully. You have received the Essence Soul Mystic Technique, Heart Sword Technique. A cold, mechanical voice sounded in Su Qin's ears. I can indeed sign in. A smile appeared on Su Qin's face. Compared to the other high sects that had existed since the previous Essence Energy Tide era, such as the Witchcraft sect and the Dao One sect, the Wanjian School had definitely existed for a much shorter period of time. According to the records of Dao accumulations, the longer a place existed, the more abundant the rewards one would receive from signing in. Of course, this wasn't absolute. It could only be said that most of the time. But no matter what, the Wanjian School had existed for thousands of years, and most of the time, it was in a flourishing period. It should have accumulated some Dao accumulations, Enough for Su Qin to sign in. Heart Sword Technique? Essence Soul Mystic Technique? Su Qin thought for a moment before focusing on the rewards he received from signing in. The Heart Sword Technique was a sword technique, but it wasn't a pure sword technique. It used one's essence soul as the foundation to condense an essence soul sword and cut through everything. This was a very terrifying mystic technique. The essence soul was like a sword that ignored any defense and directly slashed at the enemy's essence soul. If one could block it, one would live. If one couldn't, one would die. Of course, this heart sword technique wasn't without flaws. It was too extreme. It used all one's essence soul to condense a heart sword. Although it was arrogant, if the enemy's essence soul was strong enough to block this essence soul sword and break it, the one who would be seriously injured would be Su Qin. If Kanzu masters this essence soul forbidden technique, I'm afraid I'll have a headache. Su Qin thought. Although there was a golden Buddha guarding the ancestral aperture between his eyebrows, even if an earth immortal used this heart sword technique, he wouldn't be able to shake the golden Buddha. But if Kanzu disregarded everything and was willing to die together, it would cause damage to Su Qin's divine will. After all, not all of Su Qin's divine will was hidden in the ancestral aperture between his eyebrows. There was still a considerable portion of it enveloping the myriad sword island. Kanzu could completely cut off this divine will with the heart sword technique. Primordial spirit, Su Qin muttered to himself. A primordial spirit was formed from countless divine thoughts and was incomparably pure. Once a martial artist formed a primordial spirit, they would achieve a certain sublimation and would not rely too much on their physical body. Furthermore, the primordial spirit was like an illusion. Most attacks in the world had no effect on the primordial spirit. For example, Su Qin only needed a punch or a palm strike to kill a pinnacle myth. However, it took him several hours to kill a primordial spirit like Kanzu, who had lost his physical body. This was because Su Qin's physical body was already half a step into the level of Dharma physique. His qi and blood could suppress the primordial spirit to a certain extent. Otherwise, without the qi and blood at the level of Dharma physique, even if Su Qin defeated Kanzu, he wouldn't have been able to keep him here. Unless Su Qin was willing to use a trump card like Buddha's palm. However, this was overseas. Who knew how many experts were living in seclusion? Moreover, Buddha's palm caused too much of a commotion. Su Qin was worried that it would cause unnecessary trouble. Looks like I have to consider transforming my primordial spirit, Su Qin thought to himself. He had just entered the 9th heaven and wanted to spend a few years to stabilize his realm so that he could transform his primordial spirit in one go. But now, it seemed that there wasn't enough time. Su Qin destroyed Wanjian School in less than half a day. However, when he attacked, the terrifying waves produced had already spread in all directions. It didn't take long for the entire overseas to know that Wanjian School had been destroyed. Su Qin had to obtain enough power to protect himself in the face of these true overlords who had been entrenched overseas for tens of thousands of years. Therefore, transforming his primordial spirit was imminent. With Su Qin's current strength, if he transformed his primordial spirit, he would still not be a match for an earth immortal with the power of his primordial spirit and half of his Dharma body. However, if he really encountered an earth immortal, he would at least have a much easier time. I've received more than 50 primordial spirit pills from signing in at the War God Temple. There's no problem in transforming my primordial spirit, Su Qin thought to himself. Transforming his primordial spirit didn't mean stepping into the earth immortal realm from the peak of the mythical stage. If the latter failed, there would be a risk of death. However, transforming one's primordial spirit was different. It was more of a painstaking effort. At most, it would be a little slower, but it wouldn't affect one's life. In addition, with the assistance of his primordial spirit, there wouldn't be any problems. After transforming my primordial spirit, even if my physical body is destroyed, I can still seize another body and be reborn or reincarnate through a secret technique. A smile appeared on Su Qin's face. However, seizing another body was his last resort. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Su Qin would never abandon his physical body. After all, he had paid a huge price for this physical body. He had even devoured a part of the source of the earth element to barely upgrade it to half a Dharma body domain. Besides, how could other people's physical bodies, even if they were of the same level, be compared to his own physical body? Thinking of this, Su Qin had already made a decision in his heart. He was prepared to transform his primordial spirit here. Firstly, it was because this was Wanjian School. Before the news of Wanjian School's destruction spread completely, the other major sects wouldn't enter the vicinity without permission. This bought time for Su Qin. This bit of time was far from enough for other peak mythical creatures who wanted to transform their primordial spirit. However, Su Qin had the primordial spirit pill and could completely transform his primordial spirit in a short period of time. Secondly, Su Qin still needed to stay here for a few more days to see if he could sign in again. The Heart Sword technique was an primordial spirit secret technique and was extremely rare. Even a peak mythical creature like Kanzu, who had long transformed his primordial spirit, didn't have an primordial spirit secret technique. One could imagine how precious it was. And the power of the Heart Sword technique was indeed great enough. Although it was too extreme and had flaws, it was enough as a trump card. Su Qin also planned to sign in here a few more times to see if he could sign in some more secret techniques related to the primordial spirit. However, before transforming my primordial spirit, Su Qin turned his gaze and looked at the few people who were standing respectfully not far away. They were the few people who were imprisoned in the Black Abyss dungeon with Li Wan. At this moment, with Su Qin destroying Wanjian School and destroying the dungeon, they also regained their freedom. The dungeon has been broken. Why didn't you leave this place? Why did you follow me? Su Qin glanced at them and said casually, "Your Excellency's strength is unparalleled. Without your permission, even if we escape to the ends of the earth, what's the use?" The white-haired old man smiled bitterly. The white-haired old man hesitated for a moment, then gritted his teeth and said, "I have a big secret that I want to tell you." "Big secret?" Su Qin's expression didn't change as he repeated slowly, "Yes, it's a big secret." The white-haired old man said with certainty, "Wanjian School imprisoned me in the Black Abyss dungeon because they wanted to get this big secret from me, but how could I let them do as they wished?" Speaking of this, the white-haired old man sneered. Wanjian School wasn't as benevolent as Shaolin Temple, which specially built a demon suppression tower to imprison all the demonic martial artists in the world. There was only one reason why the white-haired old man and the others were imprisoned here and were still alive. They had something or information that Wanjian School needed. Otherwise, if these people were of no value to Wanjian School, they would have been dead long ago. "You didn't tell Wanjian School, but you told me?" Su Qin looked at the old man with a smile that wasn't a smile. "If I told Wanjian School the truth, how could I still be alive?" The old man shook his head, and a trace of sarcasm flashed in his tone. Wanjian School imprisoned the old man in the Black Abyss dungeon, which was equivalent to completely falling out with them. Even if the old man told them the big secret, Wanjian School wouldn't let him go. "Then tell me, aren't you afraid that I'll kill you to silence you?" Su Qin's tone was flat, without the slightest fluctuation. It was as if he didn't care about the secret that Wanjian School coveted by the old man. "With your strength, you would have killed me long ago if you wanted to." The old man smiled bitterly. "Tell me, what do you want?" Su Qin pondered for a moment and said indifferently. He didn't believe that the old man would take the initiative to tell this big secret for no reason. He must have a request. The vitality tide has recovered, the land of great battles has appeared, and Wanjian School has been destroyed. I'm afraid this world will usher in great chaos. Although I'm a peak legend, I may not be able to protect myself in this era. I hope that you can protect me." The old man with white hair and beard said respectfully. Logically speaking, as long as a peak legend didn't completely offend the major sects, it was enough to dominate a region. After all, among the many major sects overseas, except for the top few, the leaders of the other major sects were only level 6 legends. As long as a peak legend didn't cause trouble everywhere, he wouldn't attract the attention of the major sections. This was because even the major sects would have to pay a price to deal with a peak legend. They might even have to awaken their ancestors. But now, the old man with white hair and beard faintly felt that something was wrong. He was immediately prepared to exchange his biggest secret for Su Qin's protection. In fact, the old man was also betting that Su Qin was interested in his secret and wouldn't bother to silence him. Otherwise, if Su Qin waited until the old man told the secret and killed him, wouldn't there be no future trouble? Tell me, Su Qin pondered for a while and said, if your secret is useful to me, I will consider it. For Su Qin, protecting the old man was just a matter of a thought. He could just throw him into the palace. Okay. The old man with white hair and beard heaved a sigh of relief. He wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. He was afraid that Su Qin would suddenly refuse, so he immediately said quickly, Sir, do you know about the immortal sect? When the old man said the words immortal sect, he carefully glanced at Su Qin. Immortal sect? Su Qin frowned slightly. Among the many major sects overseas, there wasn't a force called immortal sect. But the old man said it so seriously, it was obvious that this immortal sect was very unusual. Sir. The old man with white hair and beard saw Su Qin's doubts and said solemnly, since the end of the last vitality tide, more than 10,000 years have passed, and more than 10 land immortals have been born. But these land immortals will leave their sects in their later years and travel the world to find the immortal sect. Chapter 282. Oh! This immortal gate is so mysterious that even Earth immortals are looking for it? Su Qin touched his chin thoughtfully. For an Earth immortal, what couldn't they get? With just a word, thousands of legends overseas would be willing to do everything to please them. But now, the white-haired old man said that there was something in the world that Earth immortals couldn't get? Why would Earth immortals look for the immortal gate? Su Qin pondered for a moment and asked faintly. Su Qin didn't think that the white-haired old man was lying. If the Earth immortals really looked for the immortal gate, the other major sects would definitely know about it. Su Qin confirmed this matter without much effort. Besides, in Su Qin's eyes, the white-haired old man's thoughts were as clear as the back of a hand. It was impossible to deceive him. There are many sayings. Some say that there is another world inside the immortal gate. Some say that if Earth immortals want to continue to break through, they must enter the immortal gate. Some even say that the immortal gate is a treasure raft created by countless experts in the last vitality tide era and can carry all living beings. The white-haired old man truthfully told him everything he knew. So that's how it is. Su Qin's eyes flashed slightly, and his heart was stirred up. Under the silence of the vitality tide, all laws withered and spiritual vigor dimmed. Even if the overseas martial arts world still maintained a certain degree of vitality, it was useless. Even if a martial artist was extremely talented, under such an environment, cultivating to the Earth immortal level was already the limit. It was as difficult as ascending to the heavens to go further. This wasn't because the martial artist's aptitude and perception were not enough, but because of the restrictions of the environment. According to the white-haired old man, the so-called immortal gate might hide the hope of the Earth immortals to continue to break through. However, this immortal gate is not a good place. Su Qin's thoughts turned quickly as he thought to himself. Even the Earth immortals only started to look for the immortal gate when Shouyuan was about to die. This meant that for the Earth immortals, the immortal gate must be a great risk. They would only look for it when they were about to die of old age. Su Qin pondered for a moment, then looked at the white-haired old man and said calmly, "Is this all the big secrets you know?" The immortal gate was definitely a big secret in the eyes of ordinary mythical warriors. But for Su Qin, a peerless powerhouse who was about to transform his primordial spirit and even tried to break through the Earth immortal realm, it was only a matter of time before he knew about the immortal gate. Wuxia school wouldn't imprison the old man in the Black Abyss dungeon just because they thought he knew about the gate of immortality. Of course not. The white-haired old man took a deep breath and suppressed his boiling emotions. He said slowly, "I also know the approximate location of the immortal sect." The approximate location of the immortal gate? Su Qin narrowed his eyes and looked at the old man. In fact, when the old man mentioned the celestial sect, Su Qin guessed that the old man might have some information about the celestial sect. But what Su Qin didn't expect was that the old man actually knew the location of the celestial sect. If the old man said that he knew that there was some kind of treasure in the celestial sect, Su Qin would definitely scoff. After all, if he wanted to get the treasure in the celestial sect, he first had to find the celestial sect. Judging from the scene of the Earth Immortals searching for the celestial sect all over the world, the location of the celestial sect must be very hidden. It might even be like the War God Temple, which was directly in the deep void. Only in this way could one avoid the all-pervasive domain of the Earth Immortal. Since you know the location of the celestial sect, why don't you look for it yourself? Su Qin stared at the old man and asked in a flat voice. The white-haired old man smiled bitterly. The location of the celestial sect must be very dangerous. Even if I really went to look for it, it's very likely that I would die. The white-haired old man was very clear about his status. Even the Earth Immortal was only willing to put his all into looking for the celestial sect in his later years, let alone a peak mythical realm like him who had yet to condense a domain. In that case, just tell me the location of the celestial sect. Su Qin looked at the old man and said. The white-haired old man immediately bowed and quickly said the location that he knew in his heart. It's here? Su Qin looked slightly surprised. The location that the white-haired old man said was not in the overseas martial arts world, but on a remote continent that was extremely far away from the overseas. This made Su Qin feel a little strange, but he thought about it and found that this was normal. If the celestial sect was in the overseas martial arts world, even if the vitality tide was silent, more than a dozen Earth Immortals were born overseas in the past 10,000 years. And the Earth Immortals roamed the world, they would have probably searched the entire overseas martial arts world. As long as the celestial sect revealed the slightest trace, it would definitely not be able to hide from those Earth Immortals. Sir, in fact, my ancestor came from this continent. Back then, he saw the manifestation of the celestial sect with his own eyes. The space within a radius of hundreds of miles shattered, but at that time, my ancestor had just entered the myth realm, so he quickly escaped from that continent. But this matter was passed down. Over the years, I kept inquiring about the celestial sect from the major sects and finally confirmed this matter, but Wanjian School found out about it. Wanjian School guessed that I might have grasped some secrets of the celestial sect, so they were so eager to find out about the celestial sect. So they directly awakened a peak myth who had condensed a domain, took me down, and forced me to reveal the secret. When the white-haired old man said this, he shook his head and said, "But how could I really do as Wanjian School wants? I'm a peak myth, and my divine sense is not weak. Even if the Kanzu of Wanjian School wakes up, it's impossible for him to search my soul by force." The white-haired old man said slowly. I see. Su Qin nodded slightly and remembered the location of the continent that the old man had mentioned. He waved his hand and said, I know. You guys can leave first. I'm going into seclusion for a while. During this period, don't disturb me unless it's important. As soon as Su Qin's voice fell, everyone present, including Li Wan, respectfully left the hall and waited at the top of the sword peak. The white-haired old man's face was obviously relieved, as if he had put down a burden. The location of the celestial sect was something that even Earth Immortals yearned for, but the old man was different. With his strength, even if he found the celestial sect, what could he do? Therefore, when he told Su Qin this secret, he immediately felt relieved. After everyone left, Su Qin slowly sat cross-legged in the depths of the hall. Celestial sect. Su Qin did not care whether there were many treasures in the celestial sect. He was different from those Earth Immortals. The cultivation of these Earth Immortals was limited by the environment of heaven and earth, but Su Qin was different. For Su Qin, the environment of heaven and earth had an impact, but it was not absolute. As long as Su Qin could continue to sign in, he could continue to become stronger. And the rewards obtained from sign-in were not determined by the environment of heaven and earth, but by the amount of Dao accumulation. To put it simply, even if the vitality tide had not recovered and was still in a dormant period, Su Qin could still enter the ninth heaven mythical realm, but it would take a longer time. Therefore, the attraction of the celestial sect to Su Qin was far less than to other Earth immortals. However, to be able to pass down from the previous vitality tide until now, the Dao accumulation must be very rich, at least surpassing that of the War God Temple, Su Qin guessed in his heart. Su Qin vaguely felt that the former was higher than the latter in terms of the level between the celestial sect and the War God Temple. Although the War God Temple was powerful, it was still incredible even in the previous vitality tide. However, several Earth immortals wanted to join forces to enter the War God Temple, but they were chased out in the end. This meant that the War God Temple should not be able to kill an Earth immortal. But the celestial sect, even Earth immortals would only start looking for it in their later years, at least on the surface. The danger of the celestial sect was already dangerous to the life and death of an Earth immortal. Forget it. It's still too early to think about the celestial sect. At least wait until I enter the Earth immortal realm before I consider looking for the celestial sect. Su Qin calmed down and thought silently in his heart. Anyway, the Dao accumulation of the celestial sect was there. Other than Su Qin, no one else in the world could use the Dao accumulation, so Su Qin was naturally not in a hurry. It's time to transform my essence soul. With a thought, dozens of elemental spirit pills appeared in front of Su Qin. The elemental spirit pills were invisible and transparent, as if they were formed by pure spirit. They emitted a faint wave of energy that made people feel comfortable. If the white-haired old man was still here, his eyes would definitely turn red when he found that the elemental spirit pills that had long been extinct in the overseas martial arts world, and even the medicine god sect could not refine them, were placed neatly in front of Su Qin like candies. One should know that one elemental spirit pill was enough to let a peak legend transform his essence soul in a short time, let alone more than 50 of them. Once Su Qin took so many elemental spirit pills, the power of the essence soul that he accumulated would definitely be terrifying. It's really magical. I wonder what the elemental spirit pills are made of. Su Qin looked at the elemental spirit pills again and thought to himself. The elemental spirit pills gave Su Qin a very special feeling, as if they were spiritual objects, but Su Qin had never seen such a special ancient medicine. Surrounded by more than 50 elemental spirit pills, Su Qin felt that his divine sense was unprecedentedly abundant. He even had a feeling that even if he did not take any elemental spirit pills within 50 years, he could still rely on himself to transform into a Yuan spirit. Of course, Su Qin would not be so stupid as to not take the elemental spirit pills and think about breaking through on his own. Su Qin carefully felt the large amount of spirit in his body slowly surging. He directly picked up a few elemental spirit pills and swallowed them. Wang! The elemental spirit pills melted as soon as they entered his throat, bursting out countless terrifying spirit power, which constantly integrated into Su Qin's spirit. This spirit power completely ignored Su Qin's body and directly rushed towards every trace of Su Qin's spirit. And with the help of this spirit power, Su Qin's spirit began to shrink and condense, faintly transforming into a more advanced form. P.S. Shame, the update time is late. Shame. There will be more later, don't panic. Welcome to Legends of Cultivation, audiobooks, where we bring ancient fantasy to life through storytelling. Follow the rise of heroes who defy fate, unlock mystical powers, and battle across celestial realms. Our audiobooks are crafted for fans of Chinese cultivation novels, filled with battles, breakthroughs, and legendary artifacts. Subscribe and be part of an unforgettable journey into the realm of immortality.